in the Rambam's description of the mitzvah of Seder night. And then there's a lovely question we can look at of the Rambam. And in answering the question on the Rambam, I hope we will come to a very useful understanding of what the mitzvah on Seder night is. I hope we'll come to a helpful understanding of what exactly we're supposed to be doing on Leil HaSeder. That's our plan for the evening. So I'm going to start with the Rambam. The Rambam in the Laws of Chametz U'Matzah, chapter 7, halacha number 1. I'm going to read it out. Oh, truth is, it's in English. I have it in Hebrew and in English. Would anyone like to read the Rambam at the beginning of the sheet? Has everyone got a copy of the sources? Oh, so we've got over here, Ezra is on the job. Thank you very much, Ezra. This is our last lesson before Pesach, which is particularly exciting for Asher this year, and exciting for all of us, truth be told. Okay, Shua, do you want to read the Rambam?
For sure. In English or in Hebrew?
I think we'll do it in English.
All right.
Oh, Shalom Aleichem, how are you doing?
According to a biblical positive command, we must tell on the night preceding the 15th day of Nisan all about the miracles and wonders that were performed for our forefathers in Egypt. As it is stated in Exodus 13:3, remember this day that you went out of Egypt, just as it is stated in Exodus 28. Remember the day of the Shabbat. And from where do we know that the remembering is on the night of the 15th? Hence we learn to say, from Exodus 13:8, and you shall recount to your son on that day, saying, because of this, at the time there is matzah and bitter herbs being this, laying in front of you. And this is the case even though he does not have a son. Even great scholars are required to tell about the Exodus from Egypt. Anyone who relates at length about the events that occurred deserves praise.
Excellent. Very, very good. Now, the next bit of Rambam, we're going to come back to in a few minutes. But the Rambam, as you probably know, the Rambam, when he wrote his Mishneh Torah, when he wrote his book of Halacha, the Rambam was very, very precise. Every word in Rambam is calculated. There's not a word in Rambam that shouldn't be there. And therefore, it's very, very interesting. And this is what I want to look at now. He quotes 2 verses. The first verse that he quotes, I understand. The first one he quotes to tell us about the biblical positive command of telling of the Leil HaSeder. Zechor et hayom hazeh asher yatzatem mimitzrayim. Remember this day that you went out of Egypt, right? Remember this day. I understand that the Rambam wants to explain that this is a biblical mitzvah. It's a biblical command. What's less clear is why the Rambam then quotes a second time about Shabbat. Do you see that? He wrote, as it is stated, we remember this day that you went out of Egypt. And then he says, he quotes a second pasuk, Zechor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember, oh thank you so much Asher and David. Remember the day of Shabbat. Now this is very interesting because I understand the first one is to teach me that I have a mitzvah to remember Seder night. But the second verse telling me that this is similar to the mitzvah of remembering Shabbat seems unnecessary. It doesn't teach me anything about the Seder night, that there is also a mitzvah to remember Shabbat. You hear the question? Mm-hmm. So the question is, why does the Rambam quote the second verse, the verse about Shabbat? Now that question is an exciting question every year around Seder night. But it's an even more exciting question this year because on the same night we will fulfill both mitzvot. We will remember the day that we came out of Egypt, Zechor et hayom asher yatzatem mimitzrayim, and we'll also remember Zechor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember that today is Shabbat. But I want to understand why Maimonides quoted both verses. You hear the question? Okay. if you turn to the other page, turn to the other side, there is a commentary called the Merakevet HaMishnah, source number 2, and he asks the question. This is a question we just asked. Tzorech Iyun. Tzorech Iyun means we need to consider Ma limadatanu kra de zachoret yom HaShabbat lekodsho tfei mikra de zachoret yom HaZerat tzatei mimitzrayim. He's put it very, very neatly. What do I learn from the verse of remember the Shabbat day that I did not already learn from the verse of remember the day that you came out of Egypt? Let me just explain. You understand what the question is? It's not what do I learn from the verse. What is you remember the Shabbat day? Of course, we learn remember the Shabbat day. That's how we know to make Kiddush. But in the context of the laws of Pesach, I only need one verse to teach me that I have a biblical command to remember the day I went out of Egypt. Zachorta yom asher yatzatem mimitzrayim. Why does Rambam say just like the mitzvah of remembering the Shabbat day? You hear that? That is the question on the Rambam that I would like to consider today. And through considering that question, I hope we will come to a very powerful understanding of what Leila Seder is all about. Okay, does everyone understand the question?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a thought on an answer?
I have an answer.
Oh my gosh, what a joy. Does life get any better than this?
It's one of the two things that we're commanded to do like every single day. Like every day we say Yom Rishon Shabbat, right? Or Yom Sheni Shabbat. And also every day you're commanded to remember the day that you came out of Mitzrayim. So it's a correlation there that between the two that you have to remember it every single day.
So the truth is that's an excellent point, and it will lead us. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. There are two mitzvot that we are commanded concerning the exodus from Egypt. We have a mitzvah every single day of Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim, remembering the exodus from Egypt. Does anyone know how we fulfill the mitzvah of remembering the exodus from Egypt? Shema.
Yeah.
Excellent. Through the Shema. Every day we say in the Shema, Ani Hashem Elokechem, Asher Hotzeiti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Liot Lachem Lelokim, Ani Hashem Elokechem Emet. When we say the third paragraph of the Shema, we fulfill our daily mitzvah of Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim. Every single day, remembering the exodus from Egypt. That's so interesting.
And at nights too, we have the same thing with the Pesach. With Pesach, I think that Zoma said like you always.
Yeah, it's a daytime or nighttime.
We also have to remember at night. We also do creation.
Correct. Yes, very, very good.
So essentially, every single day we're supposed to remember what day of the week we're in relation to Shabbat, and every day we need to remember the Exodus from its This to put it to.
Yes, but Seder, correct. We have a mitzvah every day to remember the exodus from Egypt, and we have a mitzvah every week to remember that it's Shabbat. By extension, every other day of the week, I can be remembering, how far I am from Shabbat. You follow? But really, it's a weekly mitzvah of Zechorot Yom HaShabbat. But the weekly mitzvah of Zechorot Yom HaShabbat has an impact on the whole week. When I say Hayom Yom Rishon b'Shabbat, Hayom Yom Sheni b'Shabbat, today's the first day of the week, the second day of the week, I'm remembering that, how far I am from Shabbat, and that's part of Zechorot Yom HaShabbat. But that's not the intrinsic mitzvah.
Preparing for Shabbat.
Correct. However, Seder night, and this is maybe responding to young Shai, Seder night is a different mitzvah. Seder night is not a mitzvah of Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim. On Leila Seder, we have a mitzvah of V'higadat Levincha. Nachon? Telling the story. Leila Seder is not a mitzvah of remembering, it's a mitzvah of telling the story. V'higadat Levincha Bayom Hahu. Now, it's interesting because the verse over here, that he quotes over here, Zachor Hayom Hazeh Asher Yatzata Mitzrayim, remember the day that you came out from Egypt. That mitzvah is part of the Seder night mitzvah. It's not the mitzvah of Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim that I do every single day. It's part of V'higadat Levincha, telling the story. So our question is back, Shai. The question is back because the Zechira, the memory, the Zechi Yetziat Mitzrayim is not a Seder night mitzvah. The Zechi Yetziat Mitzrayim is the everyday Leil HaSeder mitzvah. But here he brings two verses to talk about about Seder night, and the first one is telling us about Seder night. It's not clear why he brought the second verse talking about Shabbat. And okay, we're going to look at two answers for Seder. The first answer is based on the Midrash. The first answer is based on the Midrash. The Midrash in source number 3 says, "V'hizhiru Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu warned the Jewish people, Kashem shebarati et ha'olam, just like I created the world. Va'amarti lahem Yisrael, and I said to the Jewish people, Lizkor et Yom HaShabbat, Zeich le'Maasav Reshit, remember Shabbat remember that God created the world in 6 days. Shneimar Zachor et Yom HaShabbat." כך יהיו זוכרים הניסים שעשיתי להם במצרים, וזכרו ליום שיצאתם משם, שנאמר, זכור את היום הזה אשר יצאתם ממצרים. Remember the day that you came out from Egypt. So there's a mitzvah of remembering concerning Shabbat, and a mitzvah of remembering concerning Leil HaSeder. You follow? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, now based on that, source number 4, this is the Mo'adim Uzmanim. Mo'adim Uzmanim is a modern-ish, like it was written like 30 years ago perhaps, a modern halachic work. It's absolutely brilliant. It's 9 volumes long, I think. And I think it was actually written by a rabbi from London. Yossi? Originally from London, but he now lives.
No pressure. I'll take the credit.
But he now lives here in Eretz Yisrael.
Rabbi, I asked him if he knew my friend Paul McCartney since he grew up.
Oh yes, yeah.
Of course.
Excellent. Shem Yirachem. Okay, so look at this. V'nira lohosif davar chadash b'viur harambam. I would like to explain the Rambam.
Well, tea, you know, with me and the Queen and everyone.
Right. Thank you for that, Yossi. So says Modim Uzmanu, Rav Sternbuch is his name. I would like to explain the Rambam. Be'emet achiyu belel tetvav eino dafka l'saper shiyatzanu miMitzrayim v'na'asa lanu nisim v'niflaot. Now this is phenomenal. The mitzvah on Leil HaSeder is not to tell the story that we came out from Egypt. Rak tzrichim lahazkir et hayom. We need to remember the day. Hainu shebizman hazeh, at this particular time, mamash, this night. Yatzanu mimitzrayim v'na'asa lanu az bayom hazeh nisim v'niflot, and on this day great miracles happen to us. V'hainu kamo b'shabbat shetzrichim lahazkir et hayom. Hainu shayom hu yom HaShabbat kodesh. The reason why the Rambam put them together is to teach us that the memory that we need to invoke on Leil HaSeder is the same memory that we need to invoke on a Friday night. When I sit at home on a Friday night, I don't think that today's the day that God created the world. I think that today is the day of rest. That each week when we come to a Shabbat, we re-experience each week that rest, having completed a week of work. You follow? That's what Shabbat is. It's not about remembering the creation of the world. It's about experiencing the rest of the end of work. You follow? So too on Leil HaSeder, it's not to recount just a story that took place thousands of years ago. Rather, the point on Leil HaSeder, like Shabbat, is to realize that this is the moment of redemption. Just like every Friday night is the moment of resting, this is the moment of redemption. You hear that? I want to continue one more bit and then I'll explain it. ואתי שפר להביא הקרא זכור את היום הזה אשר יצאתם מישראל מצווה נמי להזכיר עצם היום כמו בשבת ולאו הכי לא יצא ולא הביא מקרא דויגץ לבינך עיקר מצווה סיפור שרק בקרא דזכור את היום הזה אשר יצאתם מישראל מבאר שצריך להזכיר מעצם היום שעכשיו יצאנו כמו שכתב. You have to experience it right now. He's saying, explains Rav Sternbuch, I'm not telling a story about an event that happened many, many years ago on Leil Seder. On Leil Seder, I am experiencing, just like every Friday night, I experience the serenity and the rest of a Shabbat. So too on Leil Seder, I experience a night of miracles, a night of redemption, of my redemption this year, just like their redemption then. You follow? Now I want to explain what Rav Sternbuch means by sharing two ideas. The first one is from Rabbi Sachs, Chief Rabbi Sachs of England. He, correct, yes, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He says, what did you just say? He says like this, that in Hebrew, if you were to read in Hebrew, if you were to translate into Hebrew the word history, does anyone know how to say the word
Historia, right?
historia?
It's the same in Russian.
So history is not a Hebrew word. If the Hebrew is historia, then all they've done is they've taken an English word and Hebraized it. But it's not. In Hebrew, if you want to speak about an event that happens in the past,
You say zikaron.
zikaron. It's a memory. Now, what's the difference between memory and history? In Tanakh, the word historia, and whenever the Torah, the Tanakh, wants to refer in generation 3 about an event in generation 1, the way to take you back is using the word lizkor, memory. What's the difference between a memory and history?
History is the actual events that happen, and memories are recollections.
So Rabbi Sachs says like this. Rabbi Sachs says, history is somebody else's story. Memory is my story. Isn't that brilliant? And therefore, on Leil HaSeder, the mitzvah Zechira is our story. You follow? That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to live my story. And what's the difference between your story and mine? When I recollect a memory, I'm there. You understand? I experience it when I have a memory. You know, I'm a kid. When I was a kid, we used to go on holiday, and we used to stay in this house with lots and lots of lavender plants. Whenever I smell lavender, so I'm a 6-year-old. I'm back as a 6-year-old in this garden. It transports a memory, brings you back. That's why the word over here is the word lizkor. And what the Rambam is doing is, by matching the two lizkor words, is saying, just like on Shabbat, it's not history of the world, how the world was created, but I'm connecting to the rest that exists on the 7th day. You follow? That's what Shabbat means. This coming Friday night, we'll all sit and we'll make Kiddush, and having worked all week, we will connect to the rest, which is Shabbat, through Zecher L'Maaseh V'Reishit, remembering the creation of the world. But really, I'm experiencing the rest right now. So I'm going to use that formula of the weekly Shabbat and apply that to Leil Seder. You follow? That's what I'm doing on Leil Seder. On Leil Seder, it's not a history lesson, it's experiencing redemption.
So wait, history is someone else's story, and memories are our own story?
Correct, exactly. That's Rabbi Sachs. And that's why the Rambam, and then following that principle, that's why the Rambam brings the word, this memory, the word zecher. like a Zechoret Yom HaShabbat. Zechoret Yom HaShabbat is one thing, and then the Zachoret Hayom Asher Yatzatem Mitzrayim. Remember the day you came out of Egypt. Remember the Shabbat day, because I'm using the same gift, the same part of me to be in that moment, the same experience that allows me to be in the Zechor moment of Shabbat, allows me to be in the Zechor moment of Leil Seder. That's point number one. Joy. Okay, I want to go to point number two. In order to get to point number two, we have to go back to the Rambam on the first page. But I'm going to introduce the Rambam on the first page with one more sentence and say like this. The more obvious verse with which the Rambam could have told us that we have a biblical command to recollect the exodus from Egypt, the more obvious verse would have been, V'yigadata levincha b'yom hahu leimor. Tell your children on that day that we came out of Egypt. You could have used that. That's the verse that is explicit in our commandment to tell the story. And the Rambam later on tells us, and also in the Shulchan Aruch, about if somebody is by themselves on Leil Seder, as thousands and thousands of people were 2 years ago on Leil Seder, by themselves. So if I'm by myself on Leil Seder, so I've got no one to tell, I still tell the story, because the mitzvah is to tell the story. You hear that? Okay, but so the Rambam doesn't use that verse, doesn't use the verse of telling the story, V'yigadata levincha. The Rambam uses the word of lizkor, memory, in order to link the memory experience of Shabbat to the memory experience of Leil Seder, in order for me to understand what I'm supposed to be doing on Leil Seder. And I might add that this year, it's so special because the two come together. On the same night, I'm going to fulfill the mitzvah of Zechoret Yom HaShabbat. I'm going to experience the serenity of Shabbat. And I'm also going to I will also fulfill the mitzvah of Zechoret Hayom Asher Yatzatem Mitzrayim. Remember this day. So I'm going to use this memory to transport me both for Shabbat and also for Pesach. Anyway, that's point number one. The Rambam, and then Rabbi Sachs. I want to add one more point. So this is a very, very powerful idea that I heard from a teacher in England called Rabbi Rafi Zaram. I was in a shir years ago. He runs a college in London, and he gave a fantastic shiur on Leil Seder, and he was talking about the mitzvah. He wanted to prove, really, as we've been talking until now, that the mitzvah on Leil Seder is not to tell the story of the exodus from Egypt. We've seen that already. Nachon?
Yeah.
Because it's about memory, not about history. But I want to take this one step further and emphasize that it's really not about telling the story of the exodus.
So we can say that Pesach and the sort of Shemot, it's not about the history of it, but the memory of it, because whether or not if it's a part of history that's not what's important. It's about remembering the moral of the story of it.
Oh, excellent. You could not have timed that better. We're going to talk about that right now. Excellent question, Hirsch. Excellent question, Hirsch. Okay, if we look at the Rambam in the continuation of what we looked at earlier, talks very, very briefly about what we need to do on Leil Seder. I'm going to read it very, very quickly. We must begin with disgrace and conclude with praise. How is that? You begin by telling at the beginning our ancestors at the time of Terach B'Voim were heretics, erring after emptiness and pursuing idolatry, and then conclude with the true religion that Hashem brought us close to Him, separating us from all the nations and bringing us close to His unification. You follow that? And likewise, he begin and let it be known that we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and all of the evil that he did to us, and then conclude with the miracles and the wonders. You start by my father was a wandering Aramean, until you finish all of that section, and anyone who adds is surely praiseworthy. The more you tell the story, the better. And then we said the three things you must mention are Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. The Pesach, the Korban Pesach, Matzah that we eat, and Maror, the bitter herbs.
What's the third one?
Bitter herbs. The Maror. Pesach, the Korban Pesach, Matzah, Maror, the bitter herbs. Now, if the story is, if our mitzvah is V'ikatz lemincha, or its memory, so I think that this idea from Rabbi Zaram fits in perfectly with what we just saw in the Rambam until now. If you, very briefly, I want to go through the Seder night, and you will see, if we go through the Seder night, that we don't actually tell a story. Okay, it goes like this. We start with Kiddush, Nachon? Kadesh. That's not the story, Nachon? We wash our hands. That's not the story. Kadesh Uchat. Karpas. We eat a vegetable. That's also not a story. Yachatz. You take the middle matzah, you break it in half. Yachatz. No? Magid. You magid, we would think this is a story. I'm going to summarize. Correct me if I miss anything out. If we're making a mistake. Magid begins with the words Ha lachma anya. This is the bread of affliction. If I was going to tell a story, you'd start by setting the scene. There was a guy called Moshe Rabbeinu. The Jews were slaves in Egypt. We don't do that. We start by saying, this is the bread of affliction. Is that the story?
No.
Very quickly, no. Afterwards, then we go to Manish Tana. Everyone stands up. The youngest sings Manish Tana Laila Azeh. Is that the story? Still not.
What is nishtana?
What's different?
Not say that.
So ma nishtana halal hazeh. What is different about this night and other night?
Excellent. That's not the story. Then after that, we come to what's Avadim Ayinu.
It's a good one.
That is actually part of a story.
Yeah, but we say in 2 lines, Avadim Ayinu L'Pharaoh Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and then God took us out. If that was the story, it was a very short story. After that, we tell the story of the rabbis in Bnei Barak. Is that the story of the Exodus from Egypt?
No, that's just a story that happened after.
Correct. That's after we talk about the rabbis in Bnei Barak. We then talk, and somebody mentioned it earlier, about Rav Elazar ben Azariah. I feel like I'm a 70-year-old. And do we tell the story in the daytime or the nighttime? Is that the story of the Exodus from Egypt?
No.
No. Then after we got the rabbis in Bnei Barak, then the debate about when to tell the story, then we have the 4 sons. Chacham, Rasha, Tam, Shena. Is that the story of the Exodus from Egypt?
No.
Still not the story. Nachon? Then, after that, just to put you into some context, we are, in most homes, about an hour to an hour and a half into the Leil HaSeder. And we haven't started telling the story yet. Then, after that, we tell a story about Terach, and then Lavan. Do you remember Lavan Bikesh Lakor et Hakol?
Yeah.
Lavan, is that the story of the Exodus from Egypt?
Well,
Yes,
no,
because
but
that's
it's
where
the
it all
start of
starts
it,
from.
actually. It's the
Okay.
start of it, so
Without
technically...
Lavan, we wouldn't have so many
So
problems.
that story is actually, it is Yehoshua. Yehoshua giving a Jewish history lesson. Right at the end of the book of Yehoshua. I mean, it's interesting, but I'm not sure that's part of the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Then we have V'hi Sha'amda. V'hi Sha'amda Shelo Echad Bilvad Amad Aleinu. Nachon, in every generation. Is that the story of the Exodus? I mean, we're getting close.
No,
We're not there yet.
It explains that in every single generation they try to kill us, but we survive.
Right. And then finally, we get to Tsei Olomat. And then we look at 4 verses from the end of the book of Devarim, 4 verses, and we explain those 4 verses. And finally, after about 2 hours, we tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. But the Seder night is really not telling the story of the Exodus. If it was telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the 4 sons aren't part of the story. The rabbis in Bnei Barak are not part of the story. And yet these are all critical parts of the Seder night. In many Haggadot, the pictures of the 4 sons are the most prominent part of the Seder night. You understand? So Rabbi Zaram explains something that fits beautifully with what we've just been talking about now, about memory, history. It's not history, it's memory. It's and then we've been explaining, all based on the Rambam, what memory means. So Rabbi Zaram says this. People, it's a very beautiful idea. He says that on Seder night, we're not telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. What we're telling the story of is the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Every night, every year, we come round together and we tell the story of how in every year the Jewish people come together and tell the story of the Exodus. I'm connecting to a story, not a story that happened 4,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago. I'm connecting to a story that has been going on every single year for the last 4,000 years.
How are we adding to the story?
And then in every generation, we add the next chapter in that story. And I'm going to explain what I mean.
Spanish Inquisition.
I'll explain what I mean first.
The Russians.
The Crusades.
Yeah,
Every year when I sit down at my Lela Seder, Hirsch, every year when we sit down, when all of us sit down at our Seder night. So when I was a little boy, at my Seder night, my grandparents would sit with us. My grandparents are now in Gan Eden. And then it was just my grandmother also moved to Gan Eden. When you sit down at your Lela Seder, you don't just see the people who are there right now, but you remember the voices, sometimes the jokes, sometimes the comments of people in generations past. And when you sit at your Seder now, you trigger the memory of previous Seders. But if you connect to them, and then they connect to their grandparents, and then you go all the way back. It's that memory that links with a memory to a memory to a memory to a memory that brings us all the way back. I have a brother-in-law who has been he's in his mid-50s now, he received a Haggadah when he was about 7 years old. And he's used that Haggadah every single year for over 45 years. Uses Haggadah. When he opens that Haggadah, his Haggadah is part of his story.
Is it like the Chavetz Chaim Sidur yet?
Exactly like the Chavetz Chaim Siddur. Thank you very much, Hirsch.
Wow.
When he opens his Haggadah, he's connecting to the story. If you spill the wine a little bit in the corner of one of the pages, next year you see that stain. That stain is your memory. That stain is part of next year's story. The little bits of matzah crumbs that might be inside, those pieces are all part of your Seder story. Each year we are connecting not to the memory of an event that happened thousands of years ago, but to a story that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years.
And it's never stopped. Never will.
And this year, we're adding the next chapter in that story. So when I look at my Haggadah, it's layered. They're layers of the Haggadah. The rabbis in Bnei Brak sat down and they were telling the story. Well, their Seder night is part of my story because I'm not remembering an event that happened thousands of years. I'm remembering how in every year we've told the story. So them telling the story is part of my memory. You follow? And then I go back, Yehoshua, when he's telling the Jewish people about this exodus from Egypt. So his story is my memory because I'm going, each time we've told the story, the memory of that telling of the story becomes part of my story in the following year. You follow? I want to add one more thing just to conclude this second addition really to what we saw in Rav Sternbuch, and that is from my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law, Aleha Hashalom, worked in Cambridge at the Geniza. And when she was working in Cambridge in the Geniza, which is a fascinating collection of Jewish books, that were discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, or perhaps at the end of the 19th century, in a geniza in Cairo. And all the contents of a shul of this in Cairo were brought to Cambridge in England, and researchers were going through it. And Rena, my sister-in-law, was one of the researchers. She saw in this geniza many, many copies of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And what she saw,
I want that Haggadah.
and what she saw in these Haggadot was how different each Haggadah was. Each family, it's like the Haggadah is like looking through a photo album. The Haggadah Shel Pesach, it's not a rigid text. Each family had added in a story, had added a poem, had added a picture, because on Leila Seder, I'm telling the story of the story, I'm connecting to the memory. And therefore, each family produced their own collection of memories. I mean, we all go back to the same original story, that story of the Exodus. And then after that, each family has been adding on layers and layers and layers in order to create the text that we read today. And each year, with our Seder, we add the next layer in the story. You follow? So according to this is how Rabbi Zaram explained the Haggadah Shel Pesach. This reading of the Haggadah fits in beautifully with what we've seen in the Rambam over here. It's a zikaron, it's a memory. That's why he wants to tell us on Leila Seder, just like on a Friday night, I'm connecting to the event. You follow? Just like on a Friday night. It's not about an event that happened 5,782 years ago when God created the world. No, I'm experiencing the serenity of Shabbat now, so I'm experiencing it now. You follow? I'm connecting to that memory. Okay, that is the Rambam, and that is the Moadim Uzmanim, with two ways, Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Zaram, to enhance our understanding. Joy, everything clear until now? Questions? Happiness? Okay.
Always happiness.
Excellent.
Amit Sameach.
You have to be happy. Okay, L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim. Thank you very much, Asher. Mazal Tov. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei nefashot rabot chesonan al kol ma shbata la'achayot ve'nefesh kol chaim baruchei ha'olamim. I could have said it at the end, but I would probably have forgotten. So, okay, people, what I'd like to do now is I want to look at the second part in source number 6. Again, we're still on the word. We're still in the words of Leman Tizkor. If you have a look in source number 6, Lo tochal alav chametz, you shouldn't eat chametz. Shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, eat matzot. Lechem oni, the bread of affliction. Ki b'chipazon, because you left quickly. B'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Yisrael. Leman tizkor et yom tzitcha me'eretz Yisrael, kol yimei chayecha, in order to remember the day that you left Egypt, all the days of your life. Leman tizkor. Do you see that? Same words. In order to remember. On those words, in order to remember, I want to read to you the words of the Sfat Emet. Sfat Emet was really the second, let's say. I think it was technically the third, but really the second Admor of Gur, the second Gera Rebbe, also lived about just over 100 years ago. Maybe a bit more, 120, 130 years ago. He writes like this: B'chol dor vador, in every generation, chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, you have to experience the Exodus for yourself. V'kasheh, but it's hard. Dahaktiv otanu otzim mamash ma ki'ilu yatsa. We have to experience as if we ourselves are leaving Egypt. So on the one hand, he says, in every generation, you have to see yourself as if you leave Egypt. But on the other hand, the Torah says, we have to say that Otanu Hotzi Misham, that we have to experience that God took us out of Egypt. So on the one hand, I want to experience as if I left Egypt, but on the other hand, I have to feel as if God is taking me out right now from Egypt. So how do I balance those two? Is it ke'ilu, meaning, do I feel it as if I came out from Egypt, or do I really feel that I'm leaving Egypt? You know, what's our Lela Seder experience? Am I trying to imagine that I came out from Egypt, or do I have some redemptive experience on Lela Seder itself? Is that the right word? Like, am I having a redemptive experience on Seder night itself? So, the Sfat Emet says like this: V'yesh lefaresh al pi lashon shetiknu be'emet v'yatziv magenu Moshiach lefneim v'vneim achreim b'chol dor v'dor. Perush ki geulat Mitzrayim lo haya b'mikre aval hu Yeshua ba'achdut kol Beit Yisrael rishonim v'achronim uv'chol dor v'dor na'asa ha'Yeshua lahem v'livneihem achareihem. וזה שאמר בכל דור ודור חייב האדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא, שבכל הדורות יש חלק לגאולה לכל איש ישראל. וכפי שזוכים להיות תוך כלל ישראל, כך זוכים לגאולה. So, this is very, very, very difficult to understand, but he says like this. You know, there are different ways of looking at the Jewish year. Some people look at the year in a linear sense, or the years in a linear sense. You know, like this was day 1, day 2, day 3, day 3, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And this is, you know, like one century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century. So I'm now 500 years from here to here. But it's linear, right? Linear from one to the other. However, what the Sfat Emet is suggesting, that don't look at the world, don't look at the years in a linear sense, but you look at it as like a circle, like this, meaning there's one circle, a bit like a spiral. And this time of year, like there's different seasons. The season of redemption is the Pesach season. So every year, when you come back to the Pesach season, you come back to the season of redemption. So it's not that they came out from Egypt, but rather they then hooked into the Geula for them, and then we have the possibility for us to hook into the same Geula now. You follow? Does that make sense to you? Let me read that one more time because it's quite hard to understand. B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, na'asa ha'yeshua lahem livneihem achareim. In every generation, the redemption occurs for them and for their children after them. V'zeh she'amar, and that's what the verse means when it says, B'chol dor v'dor, chayav adam lirot et atzmo, ki'ilu hu yatsa. It's not a verse. B'chol hadorot yesh chelek ligula. Every generation has a portion of the redemption. L'chol ish Yisrael kafi shezochin liyot toch klal Yisrael kach zochin ligula. When you tap into your connection to the Jewish people, so you are able to experience redemption. Lachein harasha, therefore the Rasha, the evil son, she'otzi et atzmo min haklal, because he removed himself from the community. He is a heretic, kafar be'ikar ha'geula, v'omer ma'avodah azot lachem she'eno margish be'geula, because he doesn't experience it for himself. Haked shinaf, we knock out his teeth. Le'mor ba'avur ze asa Hashem li, God did it for me. Shaharei ani margish ha'geula, v'lo ata, I feel the redemption, but not you. Kevan shoteta atzmecha min haklal, because you removed yourself from the community. What the Sfat Emet is saying is that this is a time of redemption. The time Seder night is a time of redemption. How do I feel the redemptive power of Seder night, whatever that might mean? I feel the redemptive power of the Seder night by connecting to the Jewish people, by being part of the Jewish story. When I become part of the Jewish story, so I feel the redemptive power of Lela Seder. The Rasha, because he disconnects himself from the Jewish people, hotzi et atzmo min haklal, therefore he doesn't feel the redemptive power of Seder night. The Sfat Emet is very much connected to what we were saying before, that if Leil Seder is about connecting to a memory, not history, connecting to a communal memory, the more I connect to the communal memory of Leil HaSeder, then the more I experience the Geula for me today. You follow? Does that make sense to everybody? We said 3 stages. I'm going to go through the 3 stages. This was the 3rd stage. The first stage was in the Rambam. The Rambam who talks about a memory. Nachon? That we have the memory of Shabbat, memory relating to Shabbat, and memory relating to Pesach. And the reason why Rambam mentioned memory, 2 verses pertaining to memory, is because the way that I understand the memory of Pesach is through my understanding of the memory that I already know about concerning Shabbat. Just like I know how to tap into the memory of Shabbat, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, I feel that serenity on Shabbat. So use that in order to tap into the memory of Zachor et Hayom Asher Atzata Mitzrayim. Remember the day you came away from Egypt. I'm sorry. That's stage 1. Clear? Okay. Then stage 2 is what we saw in the Moadim and Zmanim. Then when we're discussing what is a memory, and we're contrasting a memory with a history, and then that's how we were linking it as well to the story of the story inside a story, that a memory is my story as opposed to history, which is somebody else's story. And my goal on Leil HaSeder is to connect to my story, to connect to our story, to connect to the memory of the memories of the memories all the way back. Not a story that happened thousands of years ago, but to connect to the story that's been going on for thousands of years. So the second stage is the Leil HaSeder is about connecting to memories. And we can all do it quite easily when you open your Haggadah and a little crumb comes out, or when you remember a song from last year, or a smell, or anything that can transport you to a previous Leil HaSeder. For you, it's your first Leil HaSeder in Israel, Nachon? Yeah. But you'll have all these memories for you when you sit at the Seder table this year. So all of those memories bring you all the way back. If I remember my grandmother at the Leil HaSeder, so my grandmother brings me back to her grandmother, and her grandmother, and her, do you know what I mean? It brings me back, all the way back to the original story. You follow? So the second part is, how do I fulfill this memory of Leil HaSeder, like the Shabbat memory? I fulfill it by telling the story of the story. You follow? And what I'm doing by telling the story of the story is I'm strengthening my place within the Jewish community. I'm putting my lot as part of Klal Yisrael, as part of the Jewish people. You follow? And then the third stage, and this is what we saw in the Sfat Emet, the third stage is that by identifying, by living my connection to the Jewish people on the Seder night, I then, through that, experience redemption. You follow? Because tonight is the night of redemption. If we go back, we go through the circle. Tonight, Leil HaSeder is the night of redemption, and I experience that redemption through identifying myself identifying myself as part of the Jewish people. He mentions in brackets, that's why the Rasha is, he smashes, because he's chosen not to identify, which means he's out of the whole story. You follow? Because the whole point is to use the memory to connect myself to the Jewish people. So I want to bless us all. Is that clear to everybody, the model? Joy, happiness. I want to bless us all, Yehi Ratzon, for all of us this year on Leil HaSeder, that we should be blessed to tap into our memories. Amen. That when we tap into our memories, and our memories of our memories, that is the mitzvah of Leil HaSeder. The Haggadah Shel Pesach is like a family photo album. Going through each generation, that has been telling the story, and this year we'll be writing the next chapter of the Leil Seder story. Please God, for many, many generations to come. Have a wonderful, wonderful Chag, Kasher v'Sameach. Yishar koach, Yishar koach, Yishar koach. We'll pause.